a WikiVidi documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. Adolf Eichmann. Otto Adolf Eichmann was a German-Austrian Nazi SS-Obersturmbannführer and one of the major organizers of the Holocaust. He was tasked by SS-Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich with facilitating and managing the logistics involved in the mass deportation of Jews to ghettos and extermination camps in Nazi-occupied Eastern Europe during World War II. He was captured by the Mossad in Argentina on the 11th of May 1960 and subsequently found guilty of war crimes in a widely publicized trial in Jerusalem. Eichmann was executed by hanging in 1962, after an unremarkable school career. Eichmann briefly worked for his father's mining company in Austria, where the family had moved in 1914. He worked as a traveling oil salesman beginning in 1927, and joined both the Nazi Party and the SS in 1932. He returned to Germany in 1933, where he joined the Sicherheitsdienst. There he was appointed head of the department responsible for Jewish affairs, especially emigration, which the Nazis encouraged through violence and economic pressure. After the outbreak of the Second World War in September 1939, Eichmann and his staff arranged for Jews to be concentrated in ghettos in major cities with the expectation that they would be transported either farther east or overseas. He also drew up plans for a Jewish reservation, first at Nisko in southeast Poland and later in Madagascar, but neither of these plans was ever carried out. The Nazis began the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, and their Jewish policy changed from emigration to extermination. To coordinate planning for the genocide, Heydrich hosted the regime's administrative leaders at the Wannsee Conference on the 20th of January 1942. Eichmann collected information for him, attended the conference, and prepared the minutes. Eichmann and his staff became responsible for Jewish deportations to extermination camps, where the victims were gassed. Germany invaded Hungary in March 1944, and Eichmann oversaw the deportation of much of the Jewish population. Most of the victims were sent to Auschwitz concentration camp, where about 75% were murdered upon arrival. By the time that the transports were stopped in July 1944, 437,000 of Hungary's 725,000 Jews had been killed. Eichmann said towards the end of the war that he would leap laughing into the grave, because the feeling that he had 5 million people on his conscience would be for him a source of extraordinary satisfaction. After Germany's defeat in 1945, Eichmann fled to Austria. He lived there until 1950, when he moved to Argentina using false papers. Information collected by the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, confirmed his location in 1960. A team of Mossad and Shin Bet agents captured Eichmann and brought him to Israel to stand trial on 15 criminal charges, including war crimes, crimes against humanity, and crimes against the Jewish people. During the trial, he did not deny the Holocaust or his role in organizing it, but claimed that he was simply following orders in a totalitarian Führerprinzip system. He was found guilty on all of the charges, and was executed by hanging on the 1st of June 1962. The trial was widely followed in the media and was later the subject of several books, including Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, in which Arendt coined the phrase, "the banality of evil," to describe Eichmann. Early life and education. Otto Adolf Eichmann, the eldest of 5 children, was born in 1906 to a Calvinist Protestant family in Solingen, Germany. His parents were Adolf Karl Eichmann, a bookkeeper, and Maria, a housewife. The elder Adolf moved to Linz, Austria in 1913 to take a position as commercial manager for the Linz Tramway and Electrical Company, and the rest of the family followed a year later, after the death of Maria in 1916. Eichmann's father married Maria Zeisel, a devout Protestant with 2 sons. Eichmann attended the Kaiser Franz Joseph Staaser Realschule in Linz, the same high school Adolf Hitler had attended some 17 years before. He played the violin and participated in sports and clubs, including a Wandervogel woodcraft and scouting group that included some older boys who were members of various right-wing militias. His poor school performance resulted in his father withdrawing him from the Realschule and enrolling him in the Hohe Bundeslehranstalt für Elektrotechnik, Maschinenbau und Hochbau Vocational College. He left without attaining a degree and joined his father's new enterprise, the Untersberg Mining Company, where he worked for several months. From 1925 to 1927 he worked as a sales clerk for the Oberösterreichische Elektrobau AG radio company. Next, between 1927 and early 1933, Eichmann worked in Upper Austria and Salzburg as district agent for the Vacuum Oil Company AG. During this time, he joined the Jungfrauenkampfvereinigung, the youth section of Hermann Hildel's right-wing veterans movement, and began reading newspapers published by the Nazi Party. The party platform included removal of the Weimar Republic in Germany, rejection of the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, radical anti-Semitism, and anti-Bolshevism. They promised a strong central government, increased Lebensraum for Germanic peoples, formation of a national community based on race, and racial cleansing via the active suppression of Jews, who would be stripped of their citizenship and civil rights. Early career. On the advice of family friend and local Schutzstaffel leader Ernst Kaltenbrunner, Eichmann joined the Austrian branch of the NSDAP on 1 April 1932, member number 889,895. His membership in the SS was confirmed 7 months later. His regiment was SS Standarte 37, responsible for guarding the party headquarters in Linz and protecting party speakers at rallies, which would often become violent. Eichmann pursued party activities in Linz on weekends while continuing in his position at Vacuum Oil in Salzburg. A few months after the Nazi seizure of power in Germany in January 1933, Eichmann lost his job due to staffing cutbacks at Vacuum Oil. The Nazi Party was banned in Austria around the same time. These events were factors in Eichmann's decision to return to Germany. Like many other National Socialists fleeing Austria in the spring of 1933, Eichmann left for Passau, where he joined Andreas Bolek at his headquarters. After he attended a training program at the SS depot in Klostolchfeld in August, Eichmann returned to the Passau border in September, where he was assigned to lead an 8-man SS liaison team to guide Austrian National Socialists into Germany and smuggle propaganda material from there into Austria. In late December, when this unit was dissolved, Eichmann was promoted to SS Scharführer. Eichmann's battalion of the Deutschland Regiment was quartered at barracks next door to Dachau concentration camp. By 1934, Eichmann requested transfer to the Sicherheitsdienst of the SS, to escape the monotony of military training and service at Dachau. Eichmann was accepted into the SD and assigned to the sub-office on Freemasons, organizing seized ritual objects for a proposed museum. After about 6 months, Eichmann was invited by Leopold von Maldenstein to join his Jewish department, Section 2/112 of the SD, at its Berlin headquarters. Eichmann's transfer was granted in November 1934. He later came to consider this as his big break. He was assigned to study and prepare reports on the Zionist movement and various Jewish organizations. He even learned a smattering of Hebrew and Yiddish, gaining a reputation as a specialist in Zionist and Jewish matters. On the 21st of March 1935, Eichmann married Veronika Liebel. The couple had 4 sons, Klaus, Horst Adolf, Dieter Helmut and Ricardo Francisco. Eichmann was promoted to SS Hauptscharführer in 1936 and was commissioned as an SS Untersturmbannführer the following year. Nazi Germany used violence and economic pressure to encourage Jews to leave Germany of their own volition. Around 250,000 of the country's 437,000 Jews emigrated between 1933 and 1939. Eichmann travelled to British Mandatory Palestine with his superior Herbert Hagen in 1937 to assess the possibility of Germany's Jews voluntarily emigrating to that country. Disembarking with forged press credentials at Haifa, whence they travelled to Cairo in Egypt. There they met Feivel Polks, an agent of the Haganah, with whom they were unable to strike a deal. Polks suggested that more Jews should be allowed to leave under the terms of the Haavara agreement, but Hagen refused. Surmising that a strong Jewish presence in Palestine might lead to their founding an independent state, which would run contrary to Reich policy, Eichmann and Hagen attempted to return to Palestine a few days later, but were denied entry after the British authorities refused them the required visas. They prepared a report on their visit, which was published in 1982. In 1938, Eichmann was posted to Vienna to help organize Jewish emigration from Austria, which had just been integrated into the Reich through the Anschluss. Jewish community organizations were placed under supervision of the SD and tasked with encouraging and facilitating Jewish emigration. Funding came from money seized from other Jewish people and organizations, as well as donations from overseas, which were placed under SD control. Eichmann was promoted to SS-Obersturmbannführer in July 1938, and appointed to the Central Agency for Jewish Emigration in Vienna, created in August. By the time he left Vienna in May 1939, nearly 100,000 Jews had left Austria legally, and many more had been smuggled out to Palestine and elsewhere. Transition from emigration to deportation. Within weeks of the invasion of Poland on the 1st of September 1939, Nazi policy toward the Jews changed from voluntary emigration to forced deportation. After discussions with Hitler in the preceding weeks, on the 21st of September, SS-Obergruppenführer Reinhard Heydrich, head of the SD, advised his staff that Jews were to be collected into cities in Poland with good rail links to facilitate their expulsion from territories controlled by Germany. Starting with areas that had been incorporated into the Reich, he announced plans to create a reservation in the general government, where Jews and others deemed undesirable would await further deportation. On the 27th of September 1939, the SD and Sicherheitspolizei were combined into the new SS Reichssicherheitsamt, which was placed under Heydrich's control. After a posting in Prague to assist in setting up an emigration office there, Eichmann was transferred to Berlin in October 1939 to command the Central Office for Jewish Emigration for the entire Reich under Heinrich Müller, head of the Gestapo. He was immediately assigned to organize the deportation of 70,000 to 80,000 Jews from Ostrava district in Moravia and Katowice district in the recently annexed portion of Poland, on his own initiative. Eichmann also laid plans to deport Jews from Vienna. Under the Nisko plan, Eichmann chose Nisko as the location for a new transit camp where Jews would be temporarily housed before being deported elsewhere. In the last week of October 1939, 4,700 Jews were sent to the area by train and were essentially left to fend for themselves in an open meadow with no water and little food. Barracks were planned, but never completed. Many of the deportees were driven by the SS into Soviet-occupied territory and others were eventually placed in a nearby labor camp. The operation soon was called off, partly because Hitler decided the required trains were better used for military purposes for the time being. Meanwhile, as part of Hitler's long-range resettlement plans, hundreds of thousands of ethnic Germans were being transported into the annexed territories, and ethnic Poles and Jews were being moved further east, particularly into the general government. On the 19th of December 1939, Eichmann was assigned to head RSHA Referat 4 before, tasked with overseeing Jewish affairs and evacuation. Heydrich announced Eichmann to be his special expert in charge of arranging for all deportations into occupied Poland. The job entailed coordinating with police agencies for the physical removal of the Jews, dealing with their confiscated property, and arranging financing and transport. Within a few days of his appointment, Eichmann formulated a plan to deport 600,000 Jews into the general government. The plan was stymied by Hans Frank, Governor-General of the occupied territories, who was disinclined to accept the deportees as to do so would have a negative impact on economic development and his ultimate goal of Germanization of the region, in his role as minister responsible for the four-year plan. On the 24th of March 1940, Hermann Göring forbade any further transports into the general government unless cleared first by himself or Frank. Transports continued, but at a much slower pace than originally envisioned. From the start of the war until April 1941, around 63,000 Jews were transported into the general government. On many of the trains in this period, up to a third of the deportees died in transit. While Eichmann claimed at his trial to be upset by the appalling conditions on the trains and in the transit camps, his correspondence and documents of the period show that his primary concern was to achieve the deportations economically and with minimal disruption to Germany's ongoing military operations. Jews were concentrated into ghettos in major cities with the expectation that at some point they would be transported further east or even overseas. Horrendous conditions in the ghettos, severe overcrowding, poor sanitation, and a lack of food, resulted in a high death rate. On the 15th of August 1940, Eichmann released a memorandum titled Reichssicherheitsdienst, Madagascar Project, calling for the resettlement to Madagascar of 1 million Jews per year for 4 years. When Germany failed to defeat the Royal Air Force in the Battle of Britain, the invasion of Britain was postponed indefinitely. As Britain still controlled the Atlantic and her merchant fleet would not be at Germany's disposal for use in evacuations, planning for the Madagascar proposal stalled. Hitler continued to mention the plan until February 1942, when the idea was permanently shelved. Wannsee Conference. From the start of the invasion of the Soviet Union in June 1941, Einsatzgruppen followed the army into conquered areas and rounded up and killed Jews, Comintern officials, and ranking members of the Communist Party. Eichmann was one of the officials who received regular detailed reports of their activities. On the 31st of July, Göring gave Heydrich written authorization to prepare and submit a plan for a total solution of the Jewish question in all territories under German control and to coordinate the participation of all involved government organizations. The Generalplan Ost called for deporting the population of occupied Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union to Siberia, for use as slave labor or to be murdered. Eichmann stated at his later interrogations that Heydrich told him in mid-September that Hitler had ordered that all Jews in German-controlled Europe were to be killed. The initial plan was to implement Generalplan Ost after the conquest of the Soviet Union. However, with the entry of the United States into the war in December and the German failure in the Battle of Moscow, Hitler decided that the Jews of Europe were to be exterminated immediately rather than after the war, which now had no end in sight. Around this time, Eichmann was promoted to SS-Obersturmbannführer, the highest rank he achieved. To coordinate planning for the proposed genocide, Heydrich hosted the Wannsee Conference, which brought together administrative leaders of the Nazi regime on the 20th of January 1942. In preparation for the conference, Eichmann drafted for Heydrich a list of the numbers of Jews in various European countries and prepared statistics on emigration. Eichmann attended the conference, oversaw the stenographer who took the minutes, and prepared the official distributed record of the meeting. In his covering letter, Heydrich specified that Eichmann would act as his liaison with the departments involved. Under Eichmann's supervision, large-scale deportations began almost immediately to extermination camps at Belzec, Sobibor, Treblinka and elsewhere. The genocide was codenamed Operation Reinhard in honor of Heydrich, who died in Prague in early June from wounds suffered in an assassination attempt. Kaltenbrunner succeeded him as head of the RSHA. Eichmann did not make policy, but acted in an operational capacity. Specific deportation orders came from Reichsführer SS Heinrich Himmler. Eichmann's office was responsible for collecting information on the Jews in each area, organizing the seizure of their property, and arranging for and scheduling trains. His department was in constant contact with the Foreign Office, as Jews of conquered nations such as France could not as easily be stripped of their possessions and deported to their deaths. Eichmann held regular meetings in his Berlin offices with his department members working in the field and traveled extensively to visit concentration camps and ghettos. His wife, who disliked Berlin, resided in Prague with the children. Eichmann initially visited them weekly, but as time went on, his visits tapered off to once a month. Hungary. Germany invaded Hungary on the 19th of March 1944. Eichmann arrived the same day, and was soon joined by top members of his staff and 500 or 600 members of the SD, SS, and Sicherheitsdienst. Hitler's appointment of a Hungarian government more amenable to the Nazis meant that the Hungarian Jews, who had remained essentially unharmed until that point, would now be deported to Auschwitz concentration camp to serve as forced labor or be gassed. Eichmann toured northeastern Hungary in the last week of April and visited Auschwitz in May to assess the preparations. During the Nuremberg trials, Rudolf Höss, commandant of the Auschwitz concentration camp, testified that Himmler had told Höss to receive all operational instructions for the implementation of the final solution from Eichmann. Roundups began on the 16th of April, and from 14 May. 4 trains of 3,000 Jews per day left Hungary and travelled to the camp at Auschwitz to Birkenau, arriving along a newly built spur line that terminated a few hundred meters away from the gas chambers. Between 10–25% of the people on each train were chosen as forced laborers. The rest were killed within hours of arrival. Under international pressure, the Hungarian government halted deportations on the 6th of July 1944. By which time over 437,000 of Hungary's 725,000 Jews had died. In spite of the orders to stop, Eichmann personally made arrangements for additional trains of victims to be sent to Auschwitz on 17 and the 19th of July. In a series of meetings beginning on the 25th of April, Eichmann met with Joel Brand, a Hungarian Jew member of the Relief and Rescue Committee. Eichmann later testified that Berlin had authorized him to allow emigration of 1 million Jews in exchange for 10,000 trucks equipped to handle the wintry conditions on the Eastern Front. Nothing came of the proposal, as the Western Allies refused to consider the offer. In June 1944, Eichmann was involved in negotiations with Rudolf Kastner that resulted in the rescue of 1,684 people, who were sent by train to safety in Switzerland in exchange for 3 suitcases full of diamonds, gold, cash, and securities. Eichmann, resentful that Kurt Beecher and others were becoming involved in Jewish emigration matters, and angered by Himmler's suspension of deportations to the death camps, requested reassignment in July. At the end of August he was assigned to head a commando squad to assist in the evacuation of 10,000 ethnic Germans trapped on the Hungarian border with Romania in the path of the advancing Red Army. The people they were sent to rescue refused to leave, so instead the soldiers helped evacuate members of a German field hospital trapped close to the front. For this Eichmann was awarded the Iron Cross, 2nd class. Throughout October and November, Eichmann arranged for tens of thousands of Jewish victims to be forced to march, in appalling conditions, from Budapest to Vienna, a distance of 210 kilometers, on the 24th of December 1944. Eichmann fled Budapest just before the Soviets completed their encirclement of the capital. He returned to Berlin, where he arranged for the incriminating records of Department 4 before to be burned. Along with many other SS officers who fled in the closing months of the war, Eichmann and his family were living in relative safety in Austria when the war in Europe ended on the 8th of May 1945. Brought to you by WikiVidi Documentaries.